This is Robert Gleeman with EMR Update. I'm talking today with Mark Anderson from the AC Group. We're going to talk today about how to have a successful EMR implementation. Mark, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Mark, what do you call a successful implementation on EMR? How do you define it? And why is it so important that a person be concerned about this before they buy the EMR?
Well, I think the definition really goes back to is what does the doctor really use the EMR for? So if the physicians are out there buying EMRs and they're not able to use the product to actually improve their operations, improve clinical outcomes, it's kind of a failure. And how long should it really take for a doctor to get this thing installed, get it configured, learn how to use it, and really get the successes out of using the product is a major concern by a lot of the physicians out there. They've heard all the horror stories out there.
Why did you want to do this session on implementation so badly, more so than the other ones? Why this one?
Well, we did a survey of about 4,220 doctors, I believe the number was, back between May and September of 2007. And we asked a simple question. 1 year after buying your EMR, are you using the EMR to document the patient's visit, look at lab results, write prescriptions, the typical things that are in EMR? So 1 year after buying your EMR, are you using it to see 80% of your patients? And we thought the number would be very high, that a lot of doctors were using it. We found out that 73% of the doctors that responded stated that no, they were not using the EMR for 80% of their patients, which to us classifies as kind of a failure. If they're going to spend the money in 1 year after buying, why aren't they all using it? There must be something wrong relating towards either the products or the implementation, training, and configuration. And we all know certain products are installed and working well in practices. We have a lot of good case studies out there. If it works well in one practice and does not work well in multiple other practices, in this case 73%, there must be something going on that's not necessarily software related, but the implementation, training, and configuration. There may be a problem in that area. And that's what we spent the last 3 months actually researching what goes wrong with implementations.
What is usually the result of your study? What does go wrong?
We found that what most of the vendors are doing today is that they're selling you a package and they're providing services. The services include installing the application on your computer, what the vendors call configuration, which traditionally setting up your physician name, setting up your CPT codes, your diagnostic codes. We used to call that master file build, but a lot of the vendors are calling that configuration today. And then the vendors are teaching you how to use the product around how they've been trained to show and demonstrate the product. The product is not being configured around clinical workflows the doctor wants to actually work on. The doctors have to figure those things out as they use the product. And these are business-related questions and workflow questions that the majority of the EMR vendors do not bring up during their installation, configure, and training. And that's what we have found is the gap out there. It's the business side of running your practice. That's where most of the vendors are not getting involved in helping the practice figure out.
What should the vendors be doing differently, and what should the doctors be doing to make sure they don't have an implementation problem?
Well, the best way to answer that is to go back and look at some of the success stories out there. And we've gone back and talked to a number of practices that are classified in the industry as being very successful. They won the Davies Award or won other awards, or at least state that while they're getting some great benefits out of it. And we really went down and said, what made you successful with this EMR? And what we found is that they are spending a lot of time up front identifying the business issues that they want to address. Example would be is, what do we do with the old paper chart? Most of the vendors will come back and say, well, what do you want to do with it? You want to scan it in? Do you not want to scan it in? We've come up with 10 different ways of handling the old business chart as far as the old paper chart and to figure out what you want to do with it. They looked at the different ways of handling the old paper chart, and have looked at the business benefits, the best practices of the 10 different ways of handling it. They've analyzed it. They've figured out what's the best way for them. They configure the product that way, and then they train their staff to use the software to match their business workflow and policies. In this case, just one example, what do you do with the old paper chart?
It sounds like you're saying that both the vendor and the doctor need to be more applications-oriented, more solutions-oriented.
Yeah, I think it's getting away from just selling a product and getting into how does this product really work within the business. It's like going out and buying a car. The salesperson sells you the car, and they may show you how to turn the engine on, but they don't teach you how to drive it. And those are business issues that the vendors need to say, here are 100 business issues that you have to decide before we configure your product. And they don't do that. They're only giving you 10 or 15 hours of total training per provider, and that includes the office staff, the nurses, and the doctors. There's not enough time to analyze the practice, do all this analysis, and then configure the product, then reconfigure how you do training. What the vendors want to do is put the software in and start training the way the average physician does everything. Well, I haven't met an average physician yet. They all want things done the best way. I'm not saying their way, but what's best practices? And we've even asked some of the vendors, here's an example of paper chart. What are best practices? What are your successful doctors using your product for relating to how to handle the old paper charts? And they draw a blank. They don't know. Another good example is on the paper chart system, the nurse knows what patient to bring back next based on the way the charts are stacked. When you have an electronic health record system, you're going to know which patient to bring back next. It's typically based on a policy, either appointment time, their show-up time. If somebody shows up 15 minutes late, do they get seen before the person who shows up on time? Those kind of things. That's a business decision the practice has to make. Then you have to make sure the product can handle that. If the product only shows you the appointment time and not the check-in time, then automatically you're going to bring patients back based on appointment time. And a practice may decide, no, that's not our policy. Software doesn't work that way. We can't use the software for doing it. So it's a lot of little questions that if we asked those questions up front, answered all of those business questions, and then matched how the software would work around those, you would have much happier physicians. Implementation would be much stronger if we asked those questions up front and got good answers to those business questions.
What would you say is the most important question that the doctor should ask regarding implementation from the beginning?
I think it gets into is once I sign the contract to buy your product, when does somebody come in to analyze my workflow? And then will your trainers train us on our, and I like to call it best practice workflow? Because when a doctor buys a system, they really don't know how their workflow is going to change with the EMR. A lot of the vendors will tell them, oh, just install our product the way we have it, start using it, and then you'll figure out best practices later on. We call it clinical and operational transformation. How do you transform the practice to maximize the use of the software? Some vendors do it very good.